Okay, so here we are in Microsoft Flight Simulator again, and today we're looking at the Diamond DA62, which is a twin, as you can see. It's a pretty spectacular looking aeroplane, and it's one of the stock aeroplanes that comes with the simulator, and I think it's woeful that not so many people use it because it's fantastic. So I think one of the reasons maybe people don't use it is if you are flying this without VR, which I fly without VR, the pillars inside the cockpit do obstruct your visibility quite a lot. So that might be a reason why not many people fly it. But actually, for one of the stock airplanes that obviously you get for free, it's very, very good. So let's have a look around inside the cockpit and see what we have. So there's quite a few things that are inoperable or just flat out don't work at all in this because it's a stock aeroplane. Like the doors don't open, the handles for the doors, things like that. So the anything that's not primarily to do with flight isn't going to help you out. So you've got trim here, and which you can obviously set for the takeoff marker. You've got auxiliary fuel pumps. You've got fuel control for the engines. You've then got your throttles, obviously, which you can map to throttles on your controller if you have multiple throttles. You've got airflow around the cabin to control temperature. You've got a parking brake, which obviously will work with, hopefully, with your own controllers if you have them. So we can switch that back off again. It's interesting, actually. Oh, it is working now. Okay, so down is on. Okay, so you've got some inoperative switches around the cockpit, but things like de-icing works. This more detailed control of the engines doesn't work, but you have got the master switches for the engines left and right, and you've got the starter switches for the engines. You've got the fuel pumps left and right, so that's very straightforward. You've got an electric master, you've got an avionics master switch, a pitot heat. Obviously all of the G1000 switches work, so it is a glass cockpit aeroplane. There's no getting away from that. So if you do like steam gauges, you're not going to like this aeroplane very much. None of the breaker switches work. They're just there for decoration. The auxiliary power switch above doesn't work either. But the floodlight switches do work. So you can fly this at night, so it's it's fine for flying at night. Okay, so let's get this thing started up, take it for a circuit at Booker Airfield, and then maybe we'll go on a short flight somewhere. So first things first, let's turn on the electric master switch, and that gets us a standby attitude indicator and airspeed and altimeter over here in the middle. Next thing we're going to do is turn on the avionics, which will switch on obviously the G1000. So we'll wait for that to come up. Obviously it's standard boot up sequence. You get your primary flight display, and then you have to click a second button to get the navigation display and the engineering information to come up. We're getting a caution because the pitot heat is not on yet. So obviously we can go and find pitot, which is the great big switch here, and that goes away. So let's get the engines started up. First thing we're going to do then is move these two knobs forward. So this is the fuel control, and you will notice these little red physical switches flipped around to stop us from accidentally cutting the fuel off, which is quite a neat feature, I think. Once you've done that, you can see obviously we've got throttles here, so I'm going to push those gently forwards a little bit. We're going to turn on the fuel pumps left and right. We're going to turn on the master switches for left and right engine, and we're going to press the start button for the right engine. He says famous last words. And that's got it. And for the left engine, and there we go. So I'm just going to check the volume levels because it seems very, very quiet. Yeah, this aeroplane I think just is very, very quiet. So while we've got it sat on the parking brake, I'm going to pull up the volumes. Okay, so so you get to hear anything. I'm going to turn the volume of the simulator up to maximum. I'm just going to check something as well to see if it impacts on this. So let's open the volume mixer and turn. Okay, that's better. So now you can hear the engines and me, which is great. So obviously this is the DA62. So we've just quickly gone through there and switched on the left, or started the left and right engines. You can see the flap switches over here, so we can obviously cycle that between up, takeoff and landing, and you get a nice indicator light. You get nice indicator lights for the undercarriage as well. So let's go for a fly. It's saying we've got low voltages at the moment, and that will be because we have not switched on the alternators. Yep, so an alternator, if you don't know anything about engines, turns the motion of the engine into an electrical current. It's the opposite of if you I don't really want to go into a physics lesson here. A motor can both produce drive and generate electricity. It works both ways. So if you mechanically turn a motor, it creates electricity. If you feed electricity into a motor, it turns. So that's what an alternator does on an engine. It turns the spinning of the engine into an electric current, which we can then feed into the cockpit. So although we are running on batteries when we start the plane up, when we switch the alternator on, the aircraft powers itself from the running of the engines. Okay, so let's have a look outside as we pull away and see if we have nose wheel steering. So we get the rudder. Quite often in general aviation aircraft, the nose wheel steering won't operate until you're rolling. So let's take the parking brake off, ease the throttles forwards, and steer full right. Yeah, so we can steer, but it didn't start turning the wheel. We just put the wing through the ground staff over there. We won't take much notice of that. They're really quite annoying in Flight Simulator, aren't they? So we're going to go out across the grass to the far end of the airstrip, because the wind is coming. If we can see, can we see the windsock from here? It's over there, look. So the wind is coming this way down the runway. So we're going to gently taxi out across the grass to the far end of the runway. So this may be one of the reasons why this aircraft isn't used so much, is because the view outside is so restrictive. It's a shame, really. So obviously you can see we're just taxiing across the grass runway here. There are two runways at Booker. There's the grass, or a couple of grass airstrips, and the paved airstrip. Okay, so flaps to takeoff position, and we can see that on the lights here to confirm that they have travelled. Turn onto the runway. Okay, nice and smooth now. Full throttle. So you can see indicated airspeed's coming up. 70 knots, 80 knots. 90 knots. I'm going to begin to rotate, and we're up. Gear up. Airspeed is still climbing as I wait. Flaps up. You can see actually the side visibility is very, very good. It's just this hoop. that prevents our forward visibility quite significantly. So engines just eased back as we come through 1,000 feet to about 80%. So you can see over here the RPM of the engines, oil temperature, oil pressure, coolant temperature, fuel temperature, and obviously fuel quantity down the bottom. And it has obviously left and right fuel tanks, so the fuel in a low-wing aeroplane tends to be in the wings. So that's why you have a left and a right marker for the fuel. And if we look around in the side, we should find a switch that tells you which fuel tank. Here we go. Oh, this is rudder trim, sorry. Where is the fuel tank selector? Oh, we haven't turned the lights on. Forgot all about that. So let's go and turn the position and strobe lights on. So yeah, with this being a little bit more basic, it appears we can't dictate which fuel tank we're using. We can control the fuel going into the engine, but we can't control more than that. Okay, we're not going to worry too much about that today. So let's turn back round to 240 degrees. Let's do a nice big lazy turn, and as we go, we're flying over the top of Wycombe, by the way. This is High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire. It's a big old industrial estate down here. Lots of housing estates. It looks very flat from the air, but the roads down into the centre of Wycombe are actually quite steep. It's quite interesting how quite significant geographic features don't appear so significant when you're 1,000 feet above them. So you can see the airfield over there on the edge of Wycombe. So over here is Marlow on the River Thames. So I live about there. So I quite often fly around this area for testing things just because there's an airfield nearby, and it's quite a nice little airfield for GA aircraft. Okay, so we're coming around to 240 degrees. So we'll have a go at a quick circuit in a moment. So we're coming down to about 1,000 feet again. Don't want to get much higher than 1,000 feet for the circuit. Aircraft responds to trim very well. What we'll do is do a quick circuit, do an approach and a touch and go, then we'll climb out and we'll go and do some stall tests and see how it behaves stalling. We're flying with the wind at the moment. There's a 15 knot wind down the runway at Booker this morning, or this afternoon now I should say. So the aircraft seems to be very, very docile so far, but I think a lot of the stock aircraft in Flight Simulator are. There's quite a bit of turbulence off these fields at the moment. So let's have a look, see where we are in relation. So it's quite difficult to see over the seats in this aircraft, which is a shame. So let's come back off the throttle a bit. It's quite fast, isn't it? It's a little twin. It's obviously two engines. So there's the airfield. Just keeping an eye on the runway as we turn. So coming off the throttle, slowing down. So we're within the region where we can use flaps now if we choose to. Anything below I think there's a warning down here about don't drop the gear but above 160 knots. So we're obviously well within the realms of being able to lower the undercarriage, so I'm going to do so. I'm going to drop the flaps now. Obviously that increases drag, so you can see that happening. can see the runway. We're a little bit low, so I'm going to increase throttle, stop ourselves getting any lower for the moment. Now you can see we're going to have issues seeing over the front, so let's just center our view up. So with full flaps, even with the engines at about 65–70%, we're only just holding on to 80 knots. So it's very, very draggy with the gear and the flaps down. Obviously we can see that from outside. So I'm going to concentrate on this from inside. I'm terrible at flying the aircraft externally. I have to fly it properly, if that makes sense. So we're just coming in, just cutting the throttle as we descend, because it's obviously starting to accelerate. Oh, there's a bit of a stutter there in the simulator. Why does it always do that at the most important moments? This is a touch and go, remember, not a full stop, so we're not going to completely glide the aircraft to a standstill. So full throttle, flaps back to takeoff, and rotate, and gear up, flaps up, okay, let's see how we get on. If we climb out to a couple of thousand feet, and then we'll do some stall tests. So we're just coming up to 1,000 feet. It's 1,500 feet. And we'll start turning to go back out the other side of the airfield over the fields rather than do the stall tests over High Wycombe, which seems a bit naughty. So we'll get over the fields, although the weather, as soon as we get up to 2,000 feet though, we're getting into the base of the clouds. And it's really, it always impacts frame rate for some reason when you get the misty clouds. However they've chosen to render it is quite expensive in rendering terms. Okay, so we're coming up for 2,500 feet. So let's cut the engines and hold 5 degrees nose up or thereabouts and see what happens. So I'm feeding in quite a lot of backstick already. Holding it, whoops, holding 5 degrees, holding it. The airspeed is bleeding off, 70 knots, 75 knots. There's the stall warning. Holding 5 degrees still. Doesn't want to slow down anymore, like even on tickover or idle. That's interesting. Okay, let's pull up to 10 degrees. Let's force it. Oh, there it goes. So I'm on full backstick and it's dropped the left wing. But it's done it in a very docile manner until I kept holding it. And then it started spinning, so we will gently pull it out. So while we maintained backstick pressure, the aircraft started rotating left. It dropped the left wing. But we really had to force it into doing it. It didn't do it all on its own. So we're now going full throttle. And as soon as we let go of the stick, the aircraft stopped spinning. So it came out of the spin very, very quickly. We had to, there was no action required on us to unwind the spin, essentially. Okay, we're just coming back up through 2,000 feet again. So let's try this again in a moment. We'll get to 2,500 and then we'll go for 0 throttle and we will go left rudder but roll right at the same time and see if we can force this into doing something horrible. Right. Yeah, it's going to be fine, look. So we can come back out of this. So even if we try and corkscrew the plane round to force it to spin in kind of an accelerated spin, it won't do it. You saw it kind of try to get out of it during the first tumble. So yeah, I'm impressed. So this is the DA62. Obviously these are very extreme manoeuvres I'm doing to see how the plane tumbles, but it's actually really, really good. You have to force it to get into trouble. It won't get into trouble all on its own. Okay, so there's the River Thames, and we're just looking round to get eyes on the airfield again, and we'll come in and land. So there's Wickham. Is that the airfield? Yeah, the airfield's over here. Well, so no, that's Marlow. We've just seen whiz past. So that was Marlow. There's Wickham, and there's the airfield. So this is very much VFR in its true sense. We obviously could program the map display. And we'll see EGTB just scrolling into view over here as we get closer. So as you can see, there's actually a 22 knot headwind at this altitude coming in from the other side of the airfield. It's a nice looking aeroplane, isn't it? A big bubble canopy. It's just a shame about this huge hoop, which obviously is not an issue if you've got VR because you can just lean your head to see around it. But maybe that's why you don't see many people flying this plane in the simulator, or not from the cockpit view anyway. I know lots of Xbox players play from the outside view doing this. I just don't know how they can do that. I have to be able to see from the cockpit view. Okay, so we're going to do a full stop landing this time. I'm just going to move the view around to help me on the way in. Okay, so flaps to landing, gear down. Remember, we have that 20 knot headwind at the moment. It's getting less as we get lower. That's normal because obviously trees and buildings are going to impact that. I don't want to get much slower than 80 knots really, because you're getting into the realm where you could drop a wing. Obviously we don't have a stall warning yet, but I don't want to tempt fate. I'm easing the throttle forward more and more to maintain the speed. Oh, it's going to stall. I'm going to have to open the throttle. So it really is very, very draggy. Obviously our speed over the ground isn't 80 knots because we've got a 15 knot headwind. So we're doing more like 65 over the ground. And we're down. That was pretty straightforward, wasn't it? Nice little aeroplane. shame you can't see much with that giant hoop in the way. So yeah, this is the DA62. It's a fast little twin that is great fun for flying around, obviously navigating from A to B and, you know, doing little GA flights. And the side views are great. It's just a shame about that hoop, really. Let's go and take it back and park it up. It's a bit easier to handle on the ground than some of the others that only have differential braking. So obviously this has nose wheel steering, which is really helpful. So let's go and park it up. And that truck is going to get exactly in our way, isn't it? It's just where we want it to be. How do they do that? They must be specifically programmed with advanced AI to just get in the way. Okay, parking brake on. So to cut the engines on this, the easy way is going to be to cut the fuel off. So you open these valves back and you just pull the fuel back and the engines stop themselves. Obviously you need to go and turn the fuel pumps off, turn the engine master switches off, and jobs are good. And then obviously you can go and turn other things off around the cockpit that you'd switched on before. So the lights, the pitot heat, the AV master switches and the electrical master switch, and then you're back to where we started basically. So there you go. The DA62 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's a nice looking little aeroplane, isn't it? Right, I'm going to stop recording there and I'll see you again soon.